Lieutenant Kara Mitchell adjusted the straps of her tactical vest, her fingers trembling only slightly as she double-checked the placement of her medical kit. The rising sun painted the jagged peaks in a harsh orange glow, casting long shadows across the rugged Afghan terrain. Her breath came steady, controlled an anchor in the storm that was about to erupt. She had trained for this, countless simulations, countless drills, and yet nothing could fully prepare a soldier for the reality of walking into an ambush. Today, her role was clear. Stay alive, keep her team alive, and navigate a battlefield where danger lurked in every shadow. The operation had been classified for weeks. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding deep in the mountains, supported by a network of insurgents with advanced weaponry and knowledge of the terrain. Kara had pored over maps, satellite imagery, and reports late into the night, memorizing every ridge, every narrow pass. Each SEAL in the team relied on her skills, her knowledge, and more than anything, her courage. She felt the weight of responsibility settle like armor over her shoulders. Failure wasn't just personal. It was a matter of life and death for the men she swore to protect. Around her, the SEALs prepared silently. They were a mix of seasoned veterans and younger operatives, each radiating an aura of quiet competence. Kara observed them as she always did before a mission, noting posture, subtle facial expressions, the small gestures that betrayed nerves or fatigue. Captain Reynolds, the mission leader, walked past her, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "You ready, Mitchell?" he asked, voice low but firm. Kara nodded, a brief smile crossing her face. Always. She didn't feel always inside her stomach was coiled with tension, but she refused to show it. In moments like this, hesitation could be fatal. The helicopter blades whirred above them, kicking up dust and small stones, rattling equipment, and sending a shower of pebbles across the dry soil. The team mounted quickly, every movement precise, rehearsed, and efficient. Kara's mind flashed through her mental checklist. Tactical vest, rifle, sidearm, medical kit, hydration, comes. She paused only briefly on the last item, her earpiece, double-checking the channel. Communication would be critical when bullets flew and chaos reigned. Clear, concise instructions could save lives. As the helicopter lifted off, the wind buffeting her face and whipping her hair into her eyes, Kara allowed herself a moment to think not of fear, but of purpose. She had chosen this life, knowing full well the stakes. The exhilaration, the adrenaline, the honor of service, these were real, tangible, and addictive. And yet, she knew the cost. She had seen comrades lost in missions that seemed routine at first glance, their absence leaving a hollow ache in the heart of their units. She carried that memory with her, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. The flight to the drop zone was tense but quiet. Each soldier stared out the small window, scanning the mountains below for movement. Kara focused on her own breathing, grounding herself in the rhythm of the helicopter's thrum. She reviewed contingencies in her mind. If an ambush occurred, if someone was wounded, if extraction became impossible. She imagined scenarios, each one more harrowing than the last, yet each one with a single constant. She would act, she would save lives, and she would survive if it were humanly possible. Hours earlier, she had gone through the motions of preparation with almost ritualistic care. Every stitch of her uniform, every strap of her gear, every piece of equipment had been inspected and re-inspected. She had practiced medevac drills, applied tourniquets on training mannequins until her hands were sore, and memorized protocols for injuries she hoped she would never have to treat. But today, she knew, would not be a drill. Today, the difference between skill and instinct would be tested in the harshest crucible imaginable. The team's insertion point was a rocky plateau, a narrow clearing surrounded by cliffs and ridges. As the helicopter descended, Kara's gaze swept across the landscape, scanning for potential threats. Every boulder, every tree, every shadow seemed suspect. The SEALs landed silently, barely making a sound as they disembarked, rifles ready, eyes sharp. Kara moved with them, blending into the unit seamlessly, her presence both reassuring and necessary. She carried no illusions today, could change everything in a heartbeat. Captain Reynolds gathered the team quickly, outlining the approach. Intel reports heavy enemy movement near the ridge. Stick to cover, move fast, and keep your comms open. Mitchell, your priority is any wounded. Don't get caught out of position. Kara acknowledged with a crisp nod. Her heart pounded, a steady drum of readiness, as the team advanced toward the ridge. Every step felt measured, deliberate, but the tension coiled in her stomach like a live wire. As they moved through the narrow path, the sun climbed higher, burning the dust and casting the mountains in harsh contrast. Kara's eyes scanned constantly, noting even the smallest anomalies in the terrain. Footprints, disturbed rocks, glinting metal in the sunlight. She knew that insurgents could strike from any angle above, below, or flanking. She felt the weight of her kit on her back and the rifle at her side, but these were familiar burdens, part of the life she had chosen. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, a dance between life and potential catastrophe. They paused briefly at a rocky outcrop. Kara crouched, checking the condition of each team member, noting subtle signs of fatigue, stress, or hesitation. She whispered words of encouragement to one young SEAL, barely out of training, whose hands shook ever so slightly. Focus on your breathing. Trust your training. You've got this, she murmured. The boy nodded, swallowing hard, and tightened his grip on his weapon. Kara felt a surge of protective determination today. She wasn't just a medic. She was a lifeline. Minutes stretched like hours as the team crept closer to the suspected enemy positions. Kara's ears were alert for the slightest abnormal sound. A snapped twig, a whispered command, the faint metallic click of a weapon. Her mind raced through every possible contingency, every possible injury she might have to treat. She visualized administering aid in the most extreme conditions, stabilizing her team under fire, dragging the wounded to safety. In her mind, she rehearsed it all, knowing that preparation was half the battle and the other half was courage. Finally, they reached the ridge. The wind howled, carrying dust and the faint scent of earth and decay. Kara crouched low, scanning the horizon. Every muscle was tense, every nerve alive. The quiet before the storm was deafening. She felt the collective heartbeat of the team in sync, a silent acknowledgement of the danger that lay ahead. Today, lives would hang in the balance, and her actions would determine who survived. Kara Mitchell, lieutenant and medic, braced herself for the mission that would test her limits in ways she could not yet imagine. The moment the SEAL team reached the narrow canyon, the silence shattered. An explosion tore through the air like a thunderclap, sending rocks and dust raining down. Kara was thrown to the ground, grit cutting her palms, her ears ringing with the blast. Shouts and gunfire erupted simultaneously, filling the canyon with a deafening symphony of chaos. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze, and instinct took over. Kara rolled to cover behind a jagged boulder, her mind scanning the scene. She needed to act fast. Lives depended on it. The ambush was worse than anyone had imagined. Enemy combatants, hidden along the ridges and behind rock formations, unleashed a torrent of gunfire. Sniper rounds pinged off metal, and automatic weapons tore through the air with brutal efficiency. Kara's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, to think clearly. The SEALs returned fire, moving tactically, calling coordinates over comms. Kara, though trained for such situations, felt the tension twist her stomach into knots. This wasn't a simulation. This was real, and the consequences were immediate. Her training kicked in instinctively. Kara crawled toward the nearest wounded SEAL, a man named Daniels who had been hit in the shoulder. Blood seeped through his uniform, staining the rocks beneath him. Kneeling beside him, Kara ripped open her kit with practiced precision, applying a tourniquet and murmuring instructions. "Stay with me, Daniels. Breathe. Focus on my voice." He groaned, pain etched across his face, but followed her guidance. Around them, the battle raged on. Bullets whizzing dangerously close, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Kara felt every fiber of her body tense as she worked. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the canyon. Kara was thrown sideways, dirt and debris hitting her like tiny hammers. She tasted grit, felt the sting of bruises forming along her ribs. Command, monitoring the operation via comms, mistakenly reported her as down. Kara heard the panic in their voices before realizing that her status was misunderstood. They were about to assume she was a casualty, evacuating other units under the false assumption that she was gone. She shook her head, grim determination settling over her. She wasn't out. Not yet. Crawling over jagged rocks, Kara located 2 more SEALs pinned behind a fallen tree. One had a fractured leg, the other a deep abdominal wound. She applied first aid swiftly, her hands moving almost mechanically as adrenaline surged. The enemy fire was relentless, and each movement risked her own life. Yet Kara refused to pause, refused to allow fear to take control. Every SEAL she saved was a victory against impossible odds, a defiance of the chaos around her. The canyon was a crucible, and she was determined to emerge from it unbroken. A hail of bullets forced Kara to dive behind another rock. She pressed her back against the cold stone, assessing her situation. 5 SEALs were critically injured, and extraction was impossible under fire. Her body ached from the blasts, bruises blooming across her arms and legs, but the thought of leaving anyone behind was unthinkable. She whispered quietly, as if to herself and the canyon alike, "You're not getting away." Not today. Her voice, steady despite the chaos, seemed to anchor the team, giving them courage to hold on. The enemy, sensing disarray, pressed forward. Kara realized the canyon offered little cover if they advanced further. She called out coordinates to Reynolds, who responded with tactical instructions. Movement had to be precise. She used the jagged rocks as shields, dragging Daniels with her, while simultaneously stabilizing another SEAL's wounds. Sweat mixed with blood, stinging her eyes, but she refused to let pain slow her down. Survival wasn't just about avoiding bullets. It was about keeping others alive, despite the impossible circumstances. Then the unthinkable happened. A sniper round struck dangerously close to Kara, embedding in the boulder mere inches from her head. She froze for a moment, the world narrowing to the sharp hiss of wind and the smell of burnt gunpowder. But fear was a luxury she could not afford. She sprang into action, crawling to the next SEAL and securing him with a harness she had improvised from her kit. Every second counted. Every moment of hesitation could cost a life. Kara's mind, though exhausted, remained razor-sharp, calculating risk and reward with precision born of years of training. Amidst the chaos, Kara saw the youngest SEAL, barely out of training, pinned under debris, with a leg twisted unnaturally. His eyes were wide, terror overtaking him. Kara ignored the fire around her, ignored the pounding in her chest, and moved to him. "It's okay. You're going to be fine. I've got you," she whispered. With gritted teeth, she lifted and stabilized him, dragging him to cover. His relief was palpable, his breathing ragged, but steady under her care. For a fleeting moment, the chaos faded. It was just her and the wounded, and she refused to fail. The firefight raged on, each second stretching like an eternity. Kara's ears rang with explosions, her vision blurred with dust and sweat, but she moved with unwavering purpose. The SEALs relied on her skill, her courage, and her resolve, and she could not falter. She ducked, rolled, and dragged her team forward, each motion a testament to her endurance. Command's voice over comms grew frantic, unaware that she was alive and fully operational, a lifeline amidst the storm. Kara knew the canyon was a trap, and the enemy would exploit any hesitation. By mid-morning, Kara had accounted for all 5 wounded SEALs. Each one bore injuries that could be fatal if untreated, yet she had stabilized them with improvised techniques and sheer willpower. Her uniform was soaked in blood, hers and theirs her body, a map of bruises, cuts, and scrapes. Yet she refused to stop. Extraction was still minutes away. Enemy positions remained active, and the only path to safety was forward. She whispered to herself, a mantra to steel her resolve, one step at a time. They survive because I survive. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the canyon, and debris rained down. Kara's shoulder was struck, pain shooting through her body, but she did not scream. She had no time. One SEAL was fading, losing consciousness. Kara worked feverishly, applying pressure, stabilizing his airway, her fingers slick with blood. The enemy was closing in, yet she remained a pillar of focus. The line between fear and determination blurred, but her mission was clear. Save every life, no matter the cost. Hours seemed to stretch as Kara maneuvered her team through the deadly canyon. Every movement was tactical, calculated, and exhausting. She had become a shadow of efficiency, her mind and body functioning in perfect harmony with the demands of survival. The young SEALs began to rely on her presence, not just for treatment, but for courage, following her instructions and drawing strength from her example. Her courage was infectious, and for the first time since the ambush began, there was a glimmer of hope. As the sun reached its zenith, Kara allowed herself a brief glance at the ridge behind her. Smoke spiraled into the sky, marking the chaos and carnage they had endured. She knew Command believed she was down, but she remained alive, a silent storm ready to carry her wounded team to safety. Every wound she treated, every step she dragged a teammate forward, reaffirmed her purpose. The canyon had become a crucible of courage, and Kara Mitchell was proving herself indomitable, a medic whose bravery transcended fear and pain. She took a deep breath, bracing herself for the next phase. The ambush was far from over, and the path to extraction was littered with danger. Yet Kara knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not allow anyone to fall behind. Not today. Not ever. The battlefield was chaotic, unpredictable, and brutal, but she had faced worse in her mind and training. Now, the real test had begun, and Kara Mitchell was ready. The canyon had become a nightmare of noise and smoke. Bullets clanged against rocks, ricocheting unpredictably, while the smell of burning explosives filled the air. Kara's chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath cutting into her ribs where bruises had formed. She ignored it, forcing her body to obey the commands of her mind. She could feel exhaustion trying to creep in already, but she had no time for it. Her team needed her, and she would give every drop of strength to keep them alive. She crawled toward Daniels again, checking the tourniquet she had applied earlier. His pulse was weak, but steady. Blood loss had slowed, though his face was pale. Kara reached into her pack, pulling out a morphine auto-injector, and pressed it into his thigh. His eyes flickered with relief. She gave him a nod, silent, firm reassurance, and then turned her attention to the others. Every man around her was a thread in the fragile web of survival. If she let one go, the web would collapse. Gunfire erupted again, closer this time. Kara flattened herself against the ground, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She risked a glance over the rock she used for cover. Enemy fighters had shifted positions, trying to flank the SEALs. Kara gritted her teeth. She was no sniper, no commando, but she was trained to fight if she had to. She gripped her rifle, squeezed off 3 controlled shots, and ducked back down. It wasn't about killing. It was about buying time. Time to breathe. Time to heal. The young SEAL she had pulled from the rubble earlier, Miller, barely 22, was slipping in and out of consciousness. His leg was mangled, and shock threatened to claim him. Kara tore fabric from her own uniform sleeve to reinforce the bandage she had applied earlier. She leaned close, speaking directly into his ear, despite the roar of battle around them. "Stay with me, Miller. Look at me. You're tougher than this mountain, tougher than the pain. Don't close your eyes." His gaze flickered toward her, unfocused, but her words seemed to tether him. His breathing steadied. Kara knew she couldn't keep him fully alert, but she could keep his will to live burning a little longer. That, sometimes, made all the difference. A grenade exploded nearby, the shockwave rattling Kara's bones. She shielded Miller with her own body, feeling shrapnel slice into her shoulder. A scream ripped from her throat, but was swallowed by determination. She didn't check her own wound. There was no time. Instead, she dragged Miller further into cover, grunting with effort as pain radiated through her body. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. Captain Reynolds' voice cracked through her earpiece. "Mitchell, are you alive? Report." She pressed her cum switch, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm up. I've got 5 down stabilizing. Need suppression fire on the North Ridge." A pause. Relief echoed in Reynolds' tone. "Copy. Hold your position. We'll cover." Hearing his voice gave Kara a surge of energy. She wasn't alone in this fight. The SEALs were still pushing, still fighting, still protecting her as she protected their brothers. She moved swiftly, crawling between wounded men, checking pulses, adjusting dressings, whispering calm encouragement. Her hands moved like extensions of her mind, fast, sure, and relentless. But the battlefield was unforgiving. One of the SEALs, Ramirez, was gasping, blood bubbling from a chest wound. Kara knew the signs immediately. A sucking chest wound, air collapsing his lung. She yanked open her kit, pulling out a chest seal, and slapped it into place. Ramirez's breathing steadied, shallow but functional. She pressed her forehead against his helmet for a moment, grounding herself in the sound of his breath. One problem solved, but 100 more loomed. Her body screamed for rest. Every muscle ached, every nerve burned, but her mind cut through the haze. She thought of her training. Focus on one casualty at a time. Prioritize, stabilize, move. That mantra carried her through as she shifted to the next man and the next. The battlefield became a blur of blood, dust, and determination. She caught sight of Reynolds firing from cover, his jaw set, eyes locked on the enemy. Their gazes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, a message passed between them. "Keep going. We've got this." Kara forced her body to obey commands that seemed impossible. She lifted men twice her size, dragged them across jagged rocks, shielded them with her own frame when bullets screamed overhead. Every move tore at her wounds, but she bit down on pain and turned it into fuel. Pain meant she was alive. Alive meant she could keep fighting. Hours seemed to stretch into lifetimes. Kara lost track of time, measuring it instead by heartbeats, by bandages applied, by breaths restored. The ground was slick with blood, dust clung to every surface, and the sun beat down mercilessly. Yet through it all, she remained unbroken, a relentless force of will. Still, doubt whispered at the edges of her mind. What if you can't save them all? What if you collapse before you reach safety? She silenced it with a single thought, not today. The initial chaos of the ambush began to shift into something grim but manageable. With each man stabilized, with each wound dressed, Kara felt control returning. The enemy still pressed hard, but the SEALs were regaining momentum, their discipline holding. Kara's small victories, one man breathing, another able to hold a rifle again, were threads stitching together the fabric of survival. Her own blood soaked through her uniform, but she barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the wounded before her, the battlefield around her, and the iron determination in her chest. She wasn't just a medic now, she was the lifeline, the reason hope still flickered in the canyon. And though command had once written her off as a casualty, Kara Mitchell knew the truth. She wasn't just alive, she was unstoppable. The canyon echoed with gunfire, the staccato rhythm of violence punctuated by the screams of the wounded. Kara's hands were slick with blood, not just hers, but that of the SEALs she had sworn to protect. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was a bitter cocktail of fear and determination, pain and purpose. 5 of her team lay critically injured, scattered across jagged rocks and debris. Command still assumed she was a casualty, but Kara ignored their radios and the chaos around her. She had one mission: bring them all back alive. Her first task was Daniel's, the SEAL with the shoulder wound. Though stabilized, he couldn't walk. Kara gritted her teeth, slinging him over her shoulders like a pack as bullets whizzed past, carving grooves into the rocks. Each step was agony, her bruises screaming, muscles straining to hold him upright. Daniels groaned in pain, but murmured words of trust. "You've got this, Kara." "I know you do." The compliment, though brief, fueled her determination. She was not just carrying a body, she was carrying responsibility, hope, and the unbreakable bond of their brotherhood. Nearby, Ramirez, the man with the chest wound, was semi-conscious. Kara moved swiftly, dragging him by a harness she improvised from her kit. Each step felt like moving through molten rock. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but she refused to falter. She whispered words of encouragement to him as they moved. "Breathe, one step at a time. You're stronger than this canyon, stronger than the fire around us." His eyes flickered with clarity, a fragile connection to reality that she vowed to preserve. The young SEAL Miller was next. His leg was shattered, his body trembling with shock. Kara wrapped her arms beneath him, lifting him as carefully as she could while keeping low, using rocks for cover. Each movement was a careful calculation. Avoid bullets, avoid debris, avoid exposing any part of her team unnecessarily. She felt every ounce of her body strain under the weight, but surrender was not an option. Every life she saved became a thread of hope against the darkness that surrounded them. Time became fluid as Kara maneuvered through the canyon. She was simultaneously medic, soldier, and guardian, moving from one wounded teammate to the next. Her hands never rested. Her mind never stopped calculating the safest path through the chaos. She had to account for enemy positions, bullet trajectories, unstable terrain, and the varying injuries of her team. Each SEAL had a unique need, and she was determined to meet it. The weight of leadership pressed down, but it became a source of focus rather than fear. Kara's own injuries were relentless reminders of her mortality. Shrapnel had sliced her shoulder, leaving a burning welt, and a rock from an earlier blast had bruised her ribs. Each movement sent stabbing pain through her body, but she used it as a rhythm, a metronome to pace her survival. Fear whispered at the edges of her mind, but she drowned it with sheer determination. Not today, not here, not to them. Every step she took carried her beyond the boundaries of human endurance. The canyon narrowed, forcing Kara to make difficult choices. She couldn't carry all of them at once, and leaving anyone behind was unthinkable. Improvisation became survival. She tied Ramirez to a sturdy rope from her kit, dragging him along while balancing Daniels on her back. Miller's groans guided her, reminding her to keep moving, to keep every man tethered to life. The canyon was no longer just a battlefield. It was a test of her ingenuity, strength, and willpower. Bullets tore past, kicking up dust and debris in her path. Kara flattened herself against a jagged outcrop, shielding her team from fire while reassessing the safest route. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained precise. Every movement had to be calculated. Every second mattered. She muttered instructions to the SEALs, coordinating their limited strength with her own relentless force. Hold on, breathe, don't look down. Keep your focus on me. Her voice was calm, commanding and reassuring, a tether of sanity in the chaos. The enemy noticed the central figure moving with the wounded. Kara became their target, and yet she pressed forward, ignoring the bullets that cut close enough to sting. Sweat and blood mixed, blinding her partially, but her focus never wavered. She imagined each step as a bridge, connecting her team from certain death to safety. Her body screamed, her muscles threatened to give out, but she drew from a deeper well of strength, one forged from training, love for her team, and sheer stubborn will. At one point, she stumbled on uneven terrain, dropping Daniels partially. Panic flared, but she immediately recovered, resetting her grip, whispering reassurance to him as if he could feel her determination through her words alone. "I've got you. Always. You're not leaving this canyon." She hoisted him up, forcing her legs to move despite the screaming pain in her thighs and ribs. The canyon floor felt like it had grown steeper, each step a miniature battle of endurance against gravity, exhaustion, and chaos. By midday, the 5 SEALs were connected through Kara's ingenuity. Daniels on her back, Ramirez tied to a harness and dragged behind. Miller stabilized in her arms while crawling, and the remaining 2 supported by improvised stretchers fashioned from packs and straps. Kara moved like a whirlwind, low to the ground, navigating rocks and gunfire with astonishing precision. She was no longer just a medic. She was the heartbeat of survival, the axis on which the team's fate turned. Her earpiece crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice, calm but urgent, reached her. "Mitchell, we see you? Status?" Kara swallowed, her throat dry. 5 down. Moving to extraction. No casualties lost yet. Keep suppression fire on the ridge. A pause. Relief laced his tone. Copy that. Keep moving. You're almost there. Almost there, she muttered under her breath. Almost there. She repeated it like a mantra as they navigated the final stretch. Every step was agony, yet the thought of base and safety was a beacon. Her arms shook under the weight of Miller. Her legs burned from dragging Ramirez, but she refused to consider stopping. Failure was unthinkable. Finally, the edge of the canyon opened to a slightly flatter area, a temporary reprieve before the climb to the ridge that would lead to extraction. Kara's body felt like molten iron, every muscle trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes remained fixed on the path forward. The SEALs, though battered, responded to her commands, their trust in her absolute. She was their anchor, their lifeline, the force ensuring they did not become another casualty of the canyon. For a fleeting moment, Kara allowed herself a thought beyond the immediate struggle. She remembered her training, her mentors, the countless drills that had pushed her body and mind beyond limits. And yet, nothing could have fully prepared her for the emotional weight of carrying the lives of 5 men on her own back. She whispered their names as she moved. Daniels, Ramirez, Miller, Hernandez, Taylor. Each one a reminder that her strength was their bridge to life. Hours blurred. Kara's movements became a rhythm, a blend of crawling, lifting, dragging, and shielding. Every second was a decision. How to avoid bullets, how to navigate jagged rocks, how to keep the wounded conscious. Her own pain receded to the background. Only the survival of her team mattered. Each breath she drew was a testament to endurance, each grunt a declaration that she would not fail. By late afternoon, Kara could see the distant ridge leading to a clearing where extraction units would be waiting. Her body screamed in protest, blood loss and exertion threatening to overwhelm her, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. Every wounded SEAL was alive because of her. Every movement was a defiance of the chaos around them. She had become more than a medic. She was the embodiment of survival itself. Finally, the first glimpse of the base appeared over the ridge. Kara's heart leapt, but she didn't slow. Bullets still whizzed past, but the light at the end of the canyon was a beacon. With one last surge of energy, she hauled the final SEAL forward, crossing the ridge with all 5 men alive. Exhaustion, blood, and pain screamed through her body, but triumph surged even stronger. Kara Mitchell had done the impossible. 5 wounded SEALs had survived, carried through a battlefield where most would have perished. The ridge loomed above Kara, jagged and unforgiving, yet it was the only path to safety. She paused for a fraction of a second, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking her face. Her muscles screamed in protest, but the thought of letting any of the 5 wounded SEALs fall was unthinkable. Every second she delayed could cost a life, and she refused to let it happen. For hours, she had moved like a force of nature through the canyon, a whirlwind of determination, grit, and unwavering willpower. But now, as the enemy fire intensified near the ridge, she realized this would be the most dangerous stretch yet. Suddenly, over the crackling radio, Captain Reynolds' voice broke through the chaos. "Mitchell? Repeat. Status report." Kara pressed her comb switch, voice raw but steady. "Alive. 5 critical, wounded with me. Moving to extraction. Cover fire needed on North Ridge immediate." Silence. Then stunned disbelief. "Copy. Mitchell, we thought you were down. You're alive?" Her pulse quickened, not from surprise, but from the surge of responsibility. "Alive and operational," she replied. "No one left behind." The words hung in the air, a revelation to command and a declaration to herself. For a moment, the weight of command's misunderstanding settled over her, but she shook it off. There was no time to dwell on that. The ridge was still under fire, and any hesitation could be fatal. She refocused, her mind sharp, her body a tense coil of strength and precision. Kara assessed the situation carefully. Bullets streaked across the rocks above, enemy fighters flanking from both sides. But the slope was steep and uneven, a natural choke point that worked in her favor. She calculated her movements meticulously, knowing the wounded depended entirely on her ability to navigate this treacherous terrain. Daniels, still on her back, groaned weakly, and she murmured, "Stay with me. Just a little further." Her voice, though strained, carried authority and reassurance. She shifted her grip, adjusting Daniel's position to relieve some of the strain on her shoulders. Ramirez, tethered behind her with a makeshift harness, tugged lightly, trying to maintain balance on the rocky incline. Kara's eyes scanned constantly, tracking enemy movement, calculating the angle of each bullet, the trajectory of each grenade. The ridge might have been their last barrier before safety, but it was also the most perilous stretch. A sudden burst of gunfire from the North Ridge struck near Ramirez, throwing him off balance. Kara lunged to steady him, bullets slicing dangerously close. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the men she carried and dragged. Her mind worked in overdrive, plotting paths, avoiding fire, stabilizing injuries, and anticipating the enemy's next move. For hours she had relied on instinct and training. Now, at the critical turning point, it was sheer will that carried her forward. As she climbed, the terrain shifted to jagged boulders and loose stones. Every step threatened to send her tumbling backward. She adjusted her stance, pressing her weight against the incline, dragging Ramirez while balancing Daniels on her back. Miller, with his shattered leg, gripped her arm for support, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. Kara whispered words of encouragement, steadying both his body and spirit. "You're stronger than you think. Keep moving. We're almost there." Behind her, the sound of enemy reinforcements approached. The rhythm of gunfire quickened. Kara's ears rang with the relentless roar, but her focus remained unbroken. Every move was deliberate, every breath measured. She had become a single, unstoppable entity, a lifeline for the men who depended on her. Each gridded step up the ridge was a battle, not just against terrain and bullets, but against exhaustion, pain, and the creeping shadow of doubt. Halfway up, a sudden blast from a grenade exploded mere feet away, sending rocks and debris cascading down the slope. Kara flung herself forward, shielding Daniels with her body while maintaining grip on Ramirez's harness. The force knocked her off balance, but she caught herself, gritting her teeth against the pain radiating through her ribs and shoulder. She whispered to the SEALs, steady and commanding, "Hold on. Don't let go. We're almost there." Captain Reynolds' voice came again over the comms, this time calmer but urgent. "Mitchell, we have eyes on you. Extraction is ready. Keep moving. Don't stop now." The words were a lifeline, a reminder that the end was near. Kara allowed herself a fraction of relief, but only a fraction. The enemy still pressed, and one mistake could undo everything. Her eyes locked on the final stretch, calculating every foothold, every handhold, every angle where she could shield the men from fire. She adjusted Daniels, shifted Ramirez, and supported Miller, moving like a living machine honed for survival. Exhaustion gnawed at her limbs. Muscles burned, lungs screamed for air, her shoulder and ribs throbbed with pain, but she pushed every sensation aside. Each SEAL she carried was a testament to human resilience, a challenge she had sworn to meet. She murmured to each one, a lifeline of words amidst the chaos. "Almost there. Keep breathing. You're doing this. We're getting out." Their groans, weak nods, and faltering grips were reminders of her success so far and motivation to continue. The last few feet of the ridge were the most treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to give way, and enemy fire intensified as if sensing victory was slipping from their grasp. Kara shifted Daniels to her back fully, bracing him against her shoulders. Ramirez's harness held firm behind her, and Miller gripped her arm for stability. Every step was painstaking, each movement calculated to avoid the deadly rocks and flying bullets. Time seemed to stretch, a slow-motion dance of pain, precision, and sheer determination. At the ridge's peak, Kara allowed herself a brief glance behind. The canyon below was a tableau of chaos, smoke curling from explosions, rocks scattered like shards of glass, and the remaining SEALs returning fire with precision. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but a spark of triumph ignited within her. She had carried 5 men through a battlefield where most would have faltered. And yet, the danger was not fully behind them. The extraction point was just over the ridge, still under fire, and Kara knew she had to keep moving. With renewed focus, she began the descent to the clearing. The ground was uneven, stones and debris threatening every step, but Kara's determination overpowered fatigue. Bullets zipped past, but she shielded the men with her body, dragging and supporting each one as if her very life depended on it, because, in a sense, it did. Her mind and body operated as a single unit, instinct and willpower intertwined. At last, the edge of the clearing came into view. Extraction helicopters hovered in the distance, their rotors kicking up dust and debris, a promise of safety. Kara's pulse thundered, her body trembling from exertion, but she pressed on. She called to the SEALs, steadying them for the final push. "Almost there? Stay with me." One last stretch. Their groans and nods were faint but resolute. Together, they would make it. Finally, Kara crossed into the clearing, every step a triumph against exhaustion, fear, and fire. The seals, battered and bloodied, were alive because of her. Command finally had confirmation of the impossible. Kara Mitchell was alive, and she had brought 5 wounded warriors through hell unscathed. The realization spread through the base, and there comes a mix of disbelief, awe, and gratitude. Kara collapsed briefly, letting the weight of Daniels ease from her back. Her body screamed in protest, but the adrenaline still coursed through her veins, keeping her upright just long enough to ensure the men were stabilized for extraction. Relief, finally, began to seep in a dangerous but welcome emotion. She had done the impossible. She had survived. And she had brought 5 of her brothers back from the brink. Even as the helicopters approached, Kara's eyes remained vigilant. She refused to let herself relax entirely. The battlefield was unpredictable. Yet for the first time since the ambush began, a spark of triumph ignited within her. Command's error in marking her as a casualty had been corrected, and the recognition of her perseverance added a weight of validation to her ordeal. She wasn't just alive, she had become the lifeline, the unbroken center around which survival revolved. The clearing offered only a brief respite. Kara's chest heaved, muscles screaming, her bloodied hands slicked from gripping rocks, harnesses, and limbs. She had crossed the ridge, but the base was still a long, treacherous trek away. The canyon stretched ahead, a labyrinth of jagged rocks, narrow ledges, and enemy positions that had yet to be cleared. She glanced at her team. Daniel slumped against her back, Ramirez tethered to her waist, Miller holding on to her arm, and Hernandez and Taylor clinging to improvised stretchers. Every man relied entirely on her, and there was no room for hesitation. The first step down the steep slope nearly cost her balance. Loose stones slid underfoot, and a bullet whistled past, grazing her helmet. She adjusted quickly, pressing her body low, stabilizing Daniels, and yanking Ramirez forward with the harness. Miller groaned, pain etched across his face, but Kara kept a calm, commanding tone. "Stay with me. One step at a time. Breathe." Her voice was their anchor, steady amidst chaos, pulling them forward. The canyon floor was littered with hazards. Jagged rocks that could easily pierce a body, narrow ledges that offered little room for error, and enemy combatants still harassing from elevated positions. Kara moved with painstaking precision, each step a balance of brute strength, tactical awareness, and calculated risk. Her own body screamed with every movement, bruises along her ribs burning, muscles trembling from exhaustion, yet she pressed onward. Survival depended on momentum. Stopping was not an option. Miller stumbled, twisting his injured leg painfully. Kara caught him instantly, whispering reassurance while adjusting the weight of Daniels on her back. Her own arm shook under the strain, but she ignored it, forcing herself to focus solely on the task at hand. Ramirez's harness provided stability, but each drag required coordination and strength that bordered on superhuman. Kara realized that this trek was no longer just a physical challenge. It was a test of endurance, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. A sudden crack echoed from the canyon wall's enemy fire had targeted the ledge ahead. Kara dropped low, pulling the wounded with her, crawling over jagged rocks and using every shadow for cover. Her uniform was soaked in blood and sweat, her hands blistered and raw. Every instinct screamed at her to seek shelter, yet she knew that pausing even for a moment could cost lives. She whispered to the team, "Keep moving. We've got this. Don't let go. Stay with me." The terrain became steeper, forcing Kara to navigate perilous inclines while dragging Ramirez and Daniels. She used her legs to push off rocks, her arms straining to lift and pull, her mind constantly calculating the safest path. Each step was a negotiation with gravity, bullets, and pain. Miller whimpered from shock and pain, and Kara murmured encouragement, letting her presence serve as a shield and motivator. "You're doing great. Almost there. One more step, one more moment." The enemy's fire intensified, as if sensing their impending failure. Shots rang out from elevated ridges, forcing Kara to shift and adjust constantly. She flattened herself against the ground, positioning her body to protect Daniels on her back, while still stabilizing Ramirez's harness and guiding Miller. The two men on stretchers, Hernandez and Taylor, groaned but held on, their trust in Kara absolute. She had become the living link between life and death, the axis on which survival balanced. Kara's body was breaking under the strain, but her mind refused to falter. Each second, each step, each word of encouragement became a lifeline. The canyon walls seemed to close in, dust and smoke swirling around them, yet she kept moving. She knew the extraction point was visible, now helicopters hovered faintly in the distance, but the path remained treacherous. Every misstep could send a man tumbling. Every distraction could prove fatal. A sudden explosion rocked the canyon, throwing debris across their path. Kara flung herself over Daniels to shield him, taking the brunt of the blast against her shoulder. Pain shot through her body, a white-hot fire that made every movement agony. But she refused to stop. Ramirez, tethered behind her, yelped, and she adjusted the harness immediately, dragging him forward while crawling over the jagged rocks. Miller leaned against her for support, trusting her completely despite the agony in his leg. The sun had climbed high, turning the canyon into a furnace. Sweat poured down Kara's face, mixing with blood from her own wounds and those of the SEALs. Each breath felt like inhaling fire, each movement a battle with gravity, fatigue, and relentless enemy fire. And yet, she pressed on, driven by a force greater than pain or exhaustion, responsibility, courage, and the bond she shared with her team. Her legs threatened to collapse under the weight of Daniels and the exertion of dragging Ramirez, but she adjusted her stride, resting briefly on her forearms before pushing forward again. She whispered to each man, grounding them in her voice. "We're almost there. You can do this. Just a little further." Her words became a mantra, not just for them, but for herself. Each repetition was fuel, a lifeline against despair. Halfway through the canyon, a sudden landslide sent rocks tumbling down the slope. Kara reacted instantly, pushing Daniels to safety and repositioning Ramirez's harness. She crawled over the debris, gritting her teeth as pain radiated through her body. Miller's eyes met hers, wide with fear and exhaustion, and she gave him a small nod. "Trust me, we're getting out." That trust, fragile yet absolute, reinforced her resolve. She could not fail. Hours blurred into a continuous struggle. Kara's body ached in ways that defied description, her muscles trembling with fatigue, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She guided Hernandez and Taylor with calm precision, whispering instructions and encouragement. The wounded relied entirely on her, and she became the living embodiment of resilience, endurance, and determination. She was no longer just a medic, she was a force of survival, carrying hope through the chaos. Finally, the base began to emerge in the distance, a faint outline beyond the canyon walls. Kara's pulse surged with renewed energy, though her body screamed in protest. Bullets still zipped past, but the promise of safety spurred her forward. She adjusted her grip, repositioned Daniels, and tightened the harness for Ramirez. Miller leaned heavily on her arm, exhausted but still conscious. Hernandez and Taylor groaned, but remained stabilized. The end was in sight. Kara's final push through the canyon was a testament to human endurance. She moved like a whirlwind, dragging, lifting, and guiding each SEAL with relentless determination. Every step was agony, every breath a battle, yet she refused to surrender. The extraction point hovered closer, helicopters visible against the blazing afternoon sun. The men were alive because of her, and she would not falter now. At last, the canyon opened onto the base. Kara collapsed briefly, letting the weight of Daniels ease from her back while keeping a firm hold on Ramirez. Miller, Hernandez, and Taylor staggered, but she supported them all, ensuring no one faltered. Command personnel rushed forward, stunned by the sight. Kara Mitchell, bloodied, bruised, but alive, had carried 5 critically wounded SEALs through a battlefield where most would have perished. The realization spread like wildfire she had done the impossible. Kara's body screamed with exhaustion, yet she remained vigilant. The battlefield might have been behind them, but her duty was not complete until every man received medical care. Extraction teams moved swiftly, taking the wounded into helicopters. Kara remained at the center, ensuring their safety, her presence a final shield. The canyon, which had been a crucible of chaos and fire, had tested her in ways no drill or training could simulate, and she had emerged victorious. The roar of the helicopter blades was deafening as Kara dragged the final stretch toward the extraction point. The base was now fully visible, sprawling below the ridge, a sanctuary amidst the chaos of the canyon. Her muscles screamed in rebellion, her lungs burned, and her entire body throbbed from bruises, cuts, and exhaustion. But there was no stopping. She had come too far, carried too many, to falter in these final moments. Each wounded SEAL she moved was a thread connecting life to survival, and she refused to let any thread break. Soldiers on the ground froze as they saw her emerge from the canyon. Blood streaked her face and uniform, sweat matting her hair, muscles quivering with exertion. Yet in her eyes burned an unyielding determination, a lifeline that had carried 5 critically wounded men through a battlefield most would never survive. Commanders, initially skeptical of the reports that she had survived, now stared in disbelief. One whispered, almost inaudibly, "It can't be. She's alive?" Kara didn't stop until she reached a flat, secure area near the helicopters. Daniels, still weak on her back, was lowered gently onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttering with exhaustion and relief. Ramirez, tethered behind her, was guided onto a waiting medic cot, while Miller clung to her arm for support. Hernandez and Taylor, pale and battered, were carefully placed onto stretchers beside them. Kara's hands shook from the adrenaline crash, but she ensured each man was stable before allowing herself a brief moment to breathe. The comms crackled, and Captain Reynolds' voice finally carried the weight of awe and relief. "Mitchell, you've done the impossible. 5 down, all alive. You're incredible." Kara exhaled, a sound heavy with relief and exhaustion. She allowed herself a small, wry smile, despite the blood and bruises. "All 5, sir. No one left behind." Command personnel rushed forward, offering assistance, medical attention, and words of stunned gratitude. Medics quickly moved in to check vitals, administer IVs, and stabilize the wounded for transport. Kara's uniform was soaked through with blood, but miraculously, most of it was from her patients rather than her own injuries. Her shoulder and ribs throbbed violently, every movement a painful reminder of the battle endured, yet she remained composed, ensuring no detail of care was overlooked. Nearby, the SEALs began to stir, weak smiles breaking through pain as they realized they had survived because of Kara. Daniels reached up weakly, his fingers brushing her arm. "Thank you, Kara. Couldn't have made it without you." She crouched beside him, placing a reassuring hand over his. "You made it. You held on. That's what matters." Her voice, though hoarse, carried warmth, strength, and the quiet authority that had guided them through the canyon. Each nod, each faint smile from her team, reinforced her resolve. Survival was never a solo act, but her role as a lifeline had made the impossible possible. Captain Reynolds approached, his gaze a mixture of awe, relief, and pride. "You've set the standard for courage, Mitchell. I thought we lost you. You didn't just survive, you carried everyone with you. I've never seen anything like it." Kara shook her head slightly, fatigue tugging at her features. "Just doing my job, sir. Every life matters." The words were simple, yet weighty. In that moment, the battlefield's chaos faded, replaced by the gravity of accomplishment. Every man alive was a testament to her skill, her endurance, and her unwavering commitment to her team. She had become more than a medic. She was a force of survival, a pillar of courage whose actions would be remembered long after the dust settled. Medics began carefully lifting Daniels, Ramirez, Miller, Hernandez, and Taylor into the helicopters. Kara followed each step, assisting where necessary, ensuring that no movement caused additional harm. She checked straps, stabilized limbs, and reassured each man in a whisper only they could hear. Exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight, yet her focus never wavered. She had carried them through hell, and she would ensure their final moments before extraction were safe and calm. As the helicopters lifted off, Kara remained on the ground briefly, finally allowing herself to absorb the magnitude of what she had accomplished. Around her, command and fellow soldiers whispered in disbelief, recounting the reports of her actions in awe. She had carried 5 critically wounded men through a canyon under constant enemy fire, through treacherous terrain, and survived herself. The battlefield had tried to break her, but she had emerged not just unbroken, but victorious. A medic approached her finally, gently laying a hand on her shoulder. "You need attention, Lieutenant. Let us help." Kara exhaled deeply, allowing the weight of the day's trauma to settle. Her shoulder throbbed, ribs protested, and her muscles screamed, but she allowed herself a small nod. She had earned this moment. She had earned the chance to let someone else care for her, even for a brief while. Captain Reynolds remained close, watching her with an expression of admiration mixed with relief. "You've shown bravery that few could even imagine, Mitchell. Today, you didn't just save lives, you defined what it means to serve. The men owe you everything." Kara's eyes softened. "We all did our part, sir. I couldn't have done it alone." But deep down, she knew the truth. Without her intervention, without her endurance and ingenuity, 5 lives would have been lost. Command had marked her as a casualty, yet she had risen from the brink, carrying her team through fire, bullets, and unimaginable physical strain. It was a defining moment, one that would be recounted in briefings, stories, and quiet recollections for years to come. The wounded were finally secured in the helicopters. Kara allowed herself to take a step back, surveying the scene. The canyon stretched behind her, a brutal testament to what had just occurred. Dust swirled in the late afternoon sun, mingling with the lingering scent of gunpowder and blood. Soldiers and medics moved efficiently, stabilizing the remaining wounded, but all eyes kept returning to her. She was the center of the storm, a calm, unyielding force whose heroism had carried them through. Finally, with the helicopters lifting into the sky, Kara allowed herself to sink onto a nearby rock. Her body trembled violently, a mixture of fatigue, pain, and adrenaline finally catching up with her. Sweat and blood streaked her face, her uniform torn in places, but a quiet satisfaction radiated through her. She had faced the impossible, carried the burden of life and death on her shoulders, and emerged victorious. As medics approached to treat her, she closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel the exhaustion, the pain, and the triumph. The canyon behind her had tested every limit of her endurance, every ounce of her courage. Yet she had survived, and she had saved 5 of her brothers in arms. In the chaos of war, few moments offered clarity, but this was one. She had proven herself not only to her team and command, but to herself. Captain Reynolds crouched beside her, his voice low, filled with pride. "You've done more than anyone could imagine. Today, you are more than a soldier. You were a lifeline. Don't forget that, Kara." She allowed herself a faint smile, acknowledging the weight of his words. "I won't forget, sir." Neither will they. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the base. Kara Mitchell, bruised, bloodied, and utterly exhausted, had emerged from the canyon with 5 wounded SEALs alive. Her heroism had rewritten the expectations of courage and endurance. The battlefield had tried to claim her, to mark her as a casualty, but she had refused to yield. Today, she had redefined survival, bravery, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers. The helicopters lifted from the base, carrying Daniels, Ramirez, Miller, Hernandez, and Taylor toward the nearest field hospital. Kara followed closely behind, guided by medics who insisted on tending to her injuries first. Her shoulder throbbed, her ribs screamed with every breath, and bruises painted her body in vivid purples and blues. But the storm of exhaustion and adrenaline left her in a surreal haze. She had survived the impossible, but the reality of her ordeal was only beginning to sink in. Inside the helicopter, the wounded were stabilized further. Medics moved efficiently, checking vitals, administering fluids, and ensuring pain management. Daniels gave her a faint smile, gripping her hand briefly. "Thanks to you, Kara. I'm still here." Ramirez, weak but conscious, nodded with gratitude. Miller's eyes glimmered with both pain and awe. Each man, though battered and bruised, was alive, and Kara felt a profound, silent pride in knowing she had carried them through a trial that could have claimed their lives. Once aboard the field hospital, Kara allowed herself to finally receive attention. Medics examined her injuries: bruised ribs, a shoulder sliced by shrapnel, minor lacerations across her arms and legs, and extreme exhaustion. Every movement reminded her of the grueling trek, every touch of a medic's hand a reminder of the lives she had saved. She let herself lean into their care, realizing that she had carried not just her team, but the weight of her own endurance to the brink of collapse. As her body was treated, word of her actions spread through the base, and then the military network. Commanders recounted the reports, incredulous and awed. Kara Mitchell had been mistakenly marked as a casualty. Yet she had carried 5 critically wounded SEALs through a canyon riddled with enemy fire, jagged terrain, and constant explosions. Her stamina, courage, and ingenuity were hailed as exceptional, even legendary. She had defied every expectation, rewritten the definition of heroism in that moment, and become a living testament to human resilience under fire. A senior officer approached her in the hospital ward, his expression a mixture of admiration and solemn respect. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you've done something extraordinary. The entire chain of command recognizes what you accomplished today. Lives were saved because of you. You've set a new benchmark for courage and dedication." Kara's eyes, weary but resolute, met his. "Sir, I just did what I had to. I couldn't leave them behind." The officer nodded, understanding that Kara's humility was as remarkable as her bravery. Yet the significance of her actions could not be understated. That single act of unwavering resolve, carrying 5 men through a battlefield under continuous enemy fire, would become a story told across the military for years to come. It was a demonstration of what one person, when driven by duty and courage, could achieve in the face of overwhelming odds. Family, friends, and her fellow SEALs were informed of her survival, and messages of admiration began pouring in. Each message, each call, each letter reinforced the reality. Kara Mitchell had not only survived, but had become a symbol of dedication and heroism. Her team, once dangling on the brink of death, owed their lives to her extraordinary intervention. The canyon had tested her in ways unimaginable, yet she had emerged as an emblem of endurance, courage, and tactical brilliance. The military prepared a formal recognition ceremony, gathering her team and command in a solemn assembly. Daniels, Ramirez, Miller, Hernandez, and Taylor, each now stable and recovering, stood alongside her. Medics and soldiers who had witnessed her actions firsthand recounted the details: the weight she carried, the ingenuity in stabilizing injuries, the courage in moving under fire. Every recounting painted a picture of not just survival, but of a hero whose presence had altered the outcome of a deadly encounter. As the ceremony began, Kara stood quietly, her body still bearing the marks of the ordeal. Decorations were awarded, words of praise spoken, and applause echoed through the hall. Yet the most significant acknowledgement came from her team. Each man she had saved approached her, offering gratitude in their own words, their own gestures, a handshake, a nod, a quiet tear of relief. Daniel's eyes met hers, and in a voice trembling with emotion, he said simply, "You carried us through hell." "Thank you, Kara. Truly." Kara felt a lump in her throat. Words seemed inadequate, yet she managed a small, steady response. "We all made it. Together. That's what matters." Beyond the ceremony, her actions began to inspire a legacy. Training programs incorporated her story as an example of courage, determination, and tactical excellence. Young soldiers studied the Canyon Rescue as a case study in battlefield medicine, improvisation, and leadership under extreme stress. Kara's name became synonymous with endurance, ingenuity, and heroism. Her experience underscored a fundamental truth of military life. The courage of one can save many, and determination can defy even the most dire circumstances. In the quiet moments after recognition, Kara reflected on the ordeal. She remembered the canyon, the blast of explosions, the searing heat, and the moments when bullets had cut dangerously close. She thought of her team, their fear, their reliance on her, their perseverance, and realized that the true heroism was not just in her actions, but in the trust, unity, and resilience shared among soldiers. Her body bore scars, but her spirit was unbroken, fortified by the knowledge that she had fulfilled her duty beyond measure. Recovery was slow, each day a battle with physical pain and emotional echoes of the canyon. Yet Kara approached rehabilitation with the same determination that had carried her through the ambush. Medics marveled at her resolve, noting how she pushed through pain, exhaustion, and discomfort. Every step of recovery became another testament to her unyielding spirit, a reinforcement of the courage that had defined her actions during the crisis. Months later, her story was retold at briefings, in classrooms, and in informal discussions across the military. New recruits and seasoned soldiers alike learned of Kara Mitchell, the medic who had been marked as a casualty, but had carried 5 critically wounded SEALs to safety. Her endurance, tactical skill, and leadership under fire became a blueprint for courage, a living example of the heights humans can achieve when purpose, skill, and determination converge. Even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, Kara's legacy endured. She continued serving with distinction, her reputation solidified not by medals alone, but by the lives she had saved and the examples she had set. Command, colleagues, and civilians alike spoke of her with reverence, recounting her story as a reminder that heroism often emerges in the most unlikely, desperate, and chaotic circumstances. In quiet moments, Kara would reflect on the canyon, the screams, the fire, the weight of her team on her shoulders. She remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the raw intensity of life and death. And yet, above all, she remembered the trust of her teammates and the knowledge that, in the most impossible situation, courage and determination could carry even the heaviest burden. Her story became more than an account of battlefield heroics. It became a legend, a symbol of resilience, of human spirit, and of what it means to serve selflessly. Kara Mitchell had walked through hell, carried her brothers to safety, and emerged not just alive, but immortalized in the annals of military history. The desert dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale gold across the rugged terrain. Dust and sand clung to every surface, the worn tents, the armored vehicles, even the soldiers' gear, but it did not touch her. She moved through it with the same quiet purpose she had always carried, assembling her Barrett .50 with meticulous care. Each motion was deliberate, practiced, a ritual she had repeated countless times. To her, it was both tool and companion and responsibility. The SEAL chief watched her from a distance. Years of training in combat had taught him to recognize skill, to measure discipline, and to weigh the true courage of a soldier. But she was different. She didn't demand attention or admiration. She didn't flaunt her legend. She simply existed, and the world around her bent slightly to recognize her presence. He thought back to her first demonstration on the range, to the effortless mastery with which she handled the massive rifle. He thought of the whispers about her 3,200-meter confirmed kill story that seemed almost supernatural in its scale. He remembered the ambush in the valley, when her calm precision had saved half his team. Each memory reinforced the truth he had long suspected. She was more than a soldier. She was a force, tempered by discipline and experience, yet grounded by humanity. Yet there was more to her legacy than skill. The chief had begun to notice the subtle weight she carried, the quiet burden of each decision, the silent toll of every life taken from a distance. Other soldiers celebrated victories with laughter and storytelling, but she found no joy in recounting kills or missions. She carried them alone, internalizing the gravity of her actions with a discipline few could fathom. Later, when younger soldiers approached her with questions about her record or past missions, she offered no answers. She never boasted, never explained, never relished the awe her presence inspired. To her, reputation was irrelevant. Only action mattered. And yet, her mere existence left an indelible mark on those around her. They learned by watching, absorbing lessons she would never teach verbally. Her discipline, patience, and precision became their silent instruction. That evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, the chief found her atop the roof of the barracks, scanning the horizon with her rifle. The desert stretched endlessly, the shadows deepening, but she remained calm, focused, her movements deliberate. The stars above began to burn sharp in the fading light, distant as the targets she had faced, yet familiar in their silent constancy. "You ever get tired of this?" he asked, breaking the silence. Her eyes never left the horizon. "Tired? No. Worn? Sometimes. But purpose keeps me awake more than exhaustion ever could." The chief nodded, understanding more than he could articulate. Purpose, discipline, and the weight of every life saved and lost all intertwined in the solitude of a sniper's existence. He thought of the soldiers she had protected, the impossible long-distance shots that had shifted the tide of battles, the lives erased to save countless others. He understood that her skill was not a gift, but a burden carried with unwavering responsibility. "You've saved more lives than most people could ever imagine," he said quietly, almost to himself. She finally looked at him, the faintest hint of a smile brushing her lips, almost imperceptible against the stoic mask she wore. "We all do what we must," she said. "Some leave marks that people notice. Others don't." The chief studied her, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of her legacy. It wasn't in the records, the whispered legends, or the impossible 3,200-meter kill. It was in the lives she had touched, the missions she had completed with flawless precision, and the humanity she preserved in the face of destruction. He thought back to that impossible shot, the one that had cemented her legend. She had aimed, calculated, and fired with a detachment that could have been mistaken for coldness, but he now understood it as control. Control not for its own sake, but for the preservation of life and mission. She had carried the consequences of that shot in the quiet aftermath, just as she carried the consequences of every other decision. Night fell completely, and the base became a quiet hum of distant generators and rustling tents. The chief remained on the roof with her for a long while, neither speaking, both observing the stars. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding, respect, and the recognition of the sacrifices inherent to their profession. In that silence, the chief realized that her legend was more than myth. It was reality forged from discipline, experience, and the willingness to carry unbearable responsibility. She had not only mastered her rifle, but the art of enduring consequence, the moral weight of distance, and the solitude demanded by precision. "You understand the cost, don't you?" he finally said. She did not answer immediately. She only tightened her grip on the rifle and scanned the horizon once more, as though weighing the distance, the light, the wind, and the unseen lives that depended on her vigilance. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "I carry it because it must be carried. Every life taken, every shot fired from a distance, it shapes who you are. You cannot run from it. You cannot ignore it. You can only endure it and act with clarity." The chief nodded. He had seen the weight of war in many eyes, but few carried it with such calm mastery. She had endured what would have crushed others, and yet she remained present, disciplined, and utterly human. That combination, he realized, was her true legacy. It wasn't the record. It wasn't the legendary shot. It was her presence in the crosshairs of impossible situations, her ability to make the right decision under pressure, and her capacity to shoulder the consequences that came with it. When the operations ended and the soldiers returned home, stories of her skill spread in whispers and reports. But she never sought the spotlight. She walked among legends without claiming the title, performing feats others could barely comprehend, yet remaining quietly resolute. The chief often thought of her when he trained new recruits. He used her as an example not for the numbers, the records, or the impossible feats, but for the discipline, calm, and human understanding she brought to the battlefield. He wanted them to see that true mastery was not about glory, but about responsibility and clarity under unimaginable pressure. Years later, the chief would remember that final night on the roof, the faint stars above, the quiet of the desert, and the unspoken understanding between them. He understood then that a legend was not merely someone who performed the impossible. It was someone who carried the impossible afterward, with grace, focus, and unyielding humanity. She continued to serve, silently shaping history one impossible shot at a time. Soldiers remembered her, not only for what she could do, but for how she carried the weight of every decision, every distance, every life she touched. She had become more than a marksman. She had become a standard, a measure of what discipline, patience, and conscience could achieve when fused together. The chief watched her walk into the morning light, the rifle resting across her shoulder like an extension of herself. Every step was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. And though she carried the weight of countless unseen lives, she did so with unwavering determination. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, full of threats and uncertainty, but she faced it all with calm precision and courage. Her legend would endure, not because of whispers or numbers, but because of the lives she saved, the discipline she commanded, and the humanity she preserved, even in the crosshairs of war. And the SEAL chief, having witnessed it all, knew that she would remain a legend long after he was gone, a silent, unshakable force that history could neither erase nor forget. The desert wind shifted, carrying the quiet of the dawn as she vanished into the horizon. And in that silence, her legacy lived on, as precise and eternal as the shots she had fired, and as heavy and profound as the distance she had endured.